It's good to be here this morning. We are continuing on in our study of James. So if you want to open your Bibles to James 4, we will be going through the last verses of chapter 4, verses 13 through 17. And the whole chapter of 4, whole length of chapter 4 were warnings made by James to the believers in the church that he was speaking in. And, these are things that are here today. And that's kind of the way it is today with sin, whereas those that were prevalent or plaguing or bothering the Christians in the day of James, that they're here today too. I mean, we deal with them too, just like they did. Sin doesn't have a life expectancy, and then it fades out. It just keeps coming and going, or keeps coming and coming. And so, it's interesting that the troubles of the church of James's day are the same that we face today. So we're going to deal with one today, another one. And so we will start in verse 13, and I'll read through to the end of the chapter. And James says, "Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we shall go to such and such a city and spend a year there and engage in business and make a profit. Yet you do not know what your life will be like tomorrow. You are just a vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes away. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we shall live and also do this or that. But as it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. Therefore, to one who knows the right thing to do and does not do it, to him it is sin." We start off there in verse 13, and he kind of gives an illustration, or I don't know if you call it a story or not, but he's speaking about a specific group, and as we'll look later on in the chapter, in the verses, that these were believers. These were people that were in the church that James was speaking to, and who he was talking about were merchants, people, tradesmen. Individuals that would travel throughout the Mediterranean, and they would do business. They were businessmen. They were traders, and they went all over the Mediterranean, which at that time was pretty much the known world, was the Mediterranean area. And so they were living. They were making a living. They were doing business, and in verse 13, we see that he says, "Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we shall go to such and such a city, spend a year there, and engage in business and make a profit." These merchants carefully planned out every detail of their business trip, if you want to call it that, and they were quite detailed. They thought about a time. It was today or tomorrow. The personnel, the merchants, the place, such and such a location, a city, the duration, a time of the year, or spend a year there. The activity, engage in business or buy and sell, and the anticipated result, and make a profit. And you can see that they were very serious. It wasn't something that they just kind of got a whim and said, "Oh, well, you know what, I'm going to just take off in my boat and I'm going to go over here and see what happens there." They had a specific plan in mind. We all tend to do that, don't we? I mean, we all, unless there's some free spirits out there that just kind of flip a coin or spin the globe and say, "I'm going to go here." Pretty much anything we do today is planned. I think of the corporate business person who is going to, well, today they can go anywhere in the world and have a business presentation, and they have to plan out everything. They have to get their airline tickets, and they have to make their reservations for a car, or a hotel, or whatever they're going to need. And then they're going to have a proposal, or they're going to make a presentation. And the ultimate outcome is, well, by doing this, I'll either get their business, or I'll be able to sell my business to them, or whatever. But the end result is a profit. They're going to make money on it. Those of you that like to travel, it's almost inevitable that you have to make plans. By the way, I know somebody that can help you with that too. So, my wife and I even did that when we came to Harvey to buy the bakery. We saw it was for sale, but we didn't show up the next day and say, here's the money, we'll take it. There was a lot of planning to do. There was a lot of things that we had to do that in order for it to be a reality, in order for it to happen. And and I'm sure there's some of you out there that have done something like that, because it could be anything like buying a house, or if you're in the farming business, you got to buy some equipment, or you're going to purchase or lease some land. I'm sure all of that takes planning. All of that is something that you really consider, you really think about, and you really go through all the steps to make it happen, because we don't want to get to a position where we go about trying to do something and it falls through, because we've wasted a lot of time and we've wasted a lot of effort, and in some cases you might waste some money or have some money involved. But when we went to purchase the bakery, we had to make out a business plan. We had to list what our goals were, what we wanted to accomplish in the short term and in the long term, and everything needs to be done perfectly to ensure success, and it can be quite stressful. And there's, when I started, I said that there was a sin that James was talking about, and none of what I've just said is a sin. None of that there's nothing wrong with that. Like I said, I'm sure each one of us has done something like that at one time or another. What James is talking about is the way that they were doing it. And these merchants were making all these plans, and they were doing all these trips, and they were planning all these making all these preparations, and they weren't including God in it. And so the sin that James is talking about is the sin of self-confidence, of making plans with no regard to God's will. And so we see that, like I said, we all have to make these plans. We all have to make plans for the future. But when we do them in and of our own, according to the passage here in James, it's a sin. That's wrong. We can use a very someone I'm sure we all know of. Hopefully we don't know quite well, but that's kind of what happened with Lucifer, with Satan. If you look in Isaiah 14, he's described as saying, in Isaiah 14 verses 13 through 14, says, "But you said in your heart, I will ascend to the heaven. I will raise my throne above the stars of God, and I will sit on the mount of assembly in the recesses of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High." And Lucifer was one who wanted to be above God. And so we can see that his he was doing it because of pride. He wanted to be on the same plane of God. And the problem that we get into, the sin that we get into is not relying on God, not including God in our plans. And when we do that, then that we get into trouble, and then then we have issues. As we continue on, like I said, there's nothing wrong with making plans for the future. But we run into the problem where we try to do them on our own for basically two reasons that James talks about in verse 14. And in verse 14, he says, "Yet you do not know what your life will be like tomorrow. You are just a vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes away." The first thing that he says to these, in regards to these merchants, is that we are finite beings. We are created to a start of life, and we will have an end of life. And so we don't have any way of knowing what tomorrow is going to be like. We don't know what will happen an hour from now. We don't know what will happen 10 minutes from now. And to say that, I know what I'm going to be doing tomorrow, is really kind of arrogant. I mean, it's really, because we don't have that ability to know that for sure. And so we're finite. We don't know, what's going to happen tomorrow. And the second part is we don't know if we're even going to be around tomorrow. And that's kind of a more serious part, is that while we don't know what's going to happen, in an hour, we may not even be alive in an hour. We may not even be here in an hour. And he compares, he uses real physical things to describe what our lives are like a puff of smoke. Have you seen a puff of smoke? It's there, and in a matter of seconds, it is no more. We see that in like water vapor, steam. It's the same way. It's there, and then it's gone. That's like our lives. That's how we are. We are created to be finite, and we don't have the ability, even though some people think they can. We don't have the ability to see in the future. We don't know what's going to happen. So he's using these merchants and what they're doing, and he's saying your sin is you're being self-confident, you're being arrogant, because you're making all these plans, which is nothing wrong. You're planning out all these things. You're planning out your future. You're planning out what you want to do, but you're not including God. And you don't have that ability. You don't have the right. You don't have you can't make those because you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I can even confess that I've been guilty of doing that myself, where I thought, well, maybe it's not that big a deal. Maybe it's not that big of an issue. Maybe it's, whatever. I'll just take care of it myself. I'll make these plans because I'm pretty sure I'm going to be around tomorrow. I'm pretty sure I'm going to wake up tomorrow morning and be there to accomplish what I want to. But that's arrogant on my part and on ours, and whoever. And whenever we try to think that way and try to conduct our lives that way. So, what's the answer? Then what does James say? Well, he goes on in verse 15, and he says, instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we shall live and also do this or that. Now, is that Is that all it takes? I mean, that's pretty easy, really, when you think about it. Well, if the Lord wills, I'm good. It's not about the actual words. It's says we can do and say all the things that verse 13 spoke about. We can make all these plans, and we can and not be accused or not be have the sin of self-confidence. Like I said, by saying if the Lord wills, but the thing is that it's not just adding the words. It's not lip service. That's kind of what it says. It's not. Well, as long as I say, well, if the Lord wills, then I'm good. Everything will work out fine. It's a heart issue. It's like everything else. Anything things that we talk about in our life classes and the things that are happening today. They're not. They're very real, but there are things that are issues that we have to work through and deal with in our hearts, individually, personally. And so what the point is that everything that we do and say should be brought before God, should be presented to God, and we should include Him in everything that we do. Because it's not about saying, well, such and such will happen if the Lord wills, or I'll do this or that if the Lord wills. Everything that we do or say should be brought before God and should be according to His will. Our attitude should be, I should only do this or that if the Lord wills. I should only do this if I have, searched the Scriptures, and if I have prayed about it fervently, daily, and if I hear from Him through the Scriptures, through Him actually speaking to us and saying, yes, that's good to go. You're good to go. Paul even writes or uses that phrase in a couple of different places. Paul writes in Acts 18:21. He says, "I will return to you if the Lord, or God willing." And then in 1 Corinthians 4:19, he writes, "I will come to you shortly if the Lord wills." Now, do you think he was just saying that just to add that on and say, well, I'm good to go, because now if I said that, then I will actually be, it's what's going to happen. No, I believe Paul was fervently searching the Word, and he didn't necessarily know that he was going to, and maybe in some of those cases he didn't. That was his plan. That was what he wanted to do. That's what he had in the future. But ultimately, it was decided by God, and whether or not he should actually return to those he was speaking to, and so that's what our attitude should be in regards to this. Is that I want to make these plans. I want to be in God's will, but I need to be ready for or prepared for that. Maybe it's not going to happen because, if we're in God's will, we will, He will tell us what we need to do, and He will say, yes, you're going to do this, or He may not. So it's a lot easier if something doesn't go the way that you had planned. If you're in God's will, that He has something better for you. He has something else for you that He wants to do. Maybe you're planning on going somewhere, and He you fervently pray about it, and you're searching the Scripture, and you're listening intently, you're intentionally and seriously listening for him to speak to you. And he says, well, no, I don't want you to go here, but I want you to go here. Or I want you to do this. And as a result of that, he blesses you more. Or he uses you to either minister to someone, or maybe even present the gospel to someone. Because like I said, we don't know what the future holds. Unfortunately, as we see in the next verse, these merchants weren't. They didn't really want to. They weren't following that. They weren't following those guidelines, because we see in verse 16, he says, "But as it is, you boast in your arrogance, and all such boasting is evil." They were not consulting. They were not seeking God's will in these plans that they had for the future. These future plans that they were preparing for, and to make it worse, they were bragging about it. They were proud of it. They were, it's like, I don't need God. I can do it myself. And they were arrogant in their own self-confidence that nothing would deter them, nothing would stop them or hinder their plans for the future. Nothing was going to interfere with their time schedule. They believed they were the masters of their own fate. And James denounces this talk as evil. So a question, have we become like those in James's day? Have we gotten that confident in our own spirituality, goodness, that we don't need to consult with God? We don't need to be in his will. We don't need to have him actually be the one that is leading. We live in a society where God is continually and actually quite rapidly being left out of many areas in our society. Where years ago he was the foundation of whatever, say an organization or a group. He was the basis for why that group was started. And now it's almost illegal to have his name even spoken. And our confidence is, what's that come from? What does that stem from? Is it from because we are so prosperous or wealthy, or we're so powerful, either militarily or whatever? Where's that coming from? Why? I think we all know, but the real problem is that it's happening in the church. We can say, well, Satan is the one that's causing this for the unbeliever, because they don't know, or they're being led astray. But why is that different in the church? Why are we? There's no rule or law. There's no sign out there that says Satan's not invited. And so we have become overconfident. We've become arrogant, and maybe we even brag about it. Maybe we're even kind of proud about it. Maybe we think we have all the answers, and we want to live our lives and go as far as we can, and we want to do all the things that we can do in and of ourselves. And I said earlier that that he was speaking to these merchants who were either fellow believers, or they were involved, or they were active and members of the church that he was speaking to, or he was speaking about. Because as we look in that last verse, he says, therefore, to one who knows the right thing to do. Well, he's saying that these people, these merchants, they knew what the truth was. They knew what they should have been doing, and they weren't following that. They were going at it about themselves, and through their own power, through their own energy. And James has a very very harsh response to that. In the second part, it says in verse 17, is therefore to one who knows the right thing to do and does not do it, to him it is sin. It doesn't get any basicer than that. It's not, well, it could be, or might be, depending on how it turns out. No, it is sin. And so it says they knew the humility and dependence on God were essential in Christian living. Knowing the right thing to do meant being totally dependent on God and seeking His will. And if we know this and don't do it, we are sinning. It's as plain as that. But there's kind of a broader application to this. It says in any aim or anything in life that we are looking to or planning to or whatever, or wanting to do, the opportunity to do good makes us responsible to do it. And if you know what is right, if you know there's a right way to do it, you're obligated to do that. You have a responsibility to live up to that, because failure to do so is sinning against God. It's sinning against our neighbors, and it's ultimately sinning against ourselves. So we see this example that James gives, and how in many ways it's the same as it's what we deal with, or what we are involved with, and what we encounter today. That's the greatness about His Word, is that it knows no boundaries, knows no time frames, and that things that were relevant and pertinent and important and issues in His day are just as important, relevant, and pertain to today. So as we look through this chapter, and we see various things that James has spoken to us, or spoken to in the chapter. There's some lists of them here. He says he's basically he's speaking to believers, and we're being put on trial. We're being because we haven't been following what the Word has said, what God has been wanting, His will for each of us. We have all through chapter 4, we have issues of covetousness and conflict, evil speaking with regard to planning without consulting the Lord. So we have some questions. There's especially for today, the topic for today with the self-confidence. Do I make plans without consulting the Lord? And you know, that's something that we need to, that I want to challenge each and every one of us, and really seriously ask that question. Do I make plans? Do I have these things for the future that I want to do? Do I consult the Lord? Am I earnestly and honestly seeking Him, seeking to hear from Him in this area? You know, hopefully this chapter and these verses have spoken to us, to you, whoever. You know, God desires us to be content and have fellowship with fellow believers and with Him. And He desires, and He desperately wants us to include Him in all of our decisions and in all of our plans. So it's again, we see from today, from this chapter, from these verses, that we're no different from those of James's day. You know, we deal with the same issues. We have the same things affecting us. But we also have goals. We have plans. We have things for the future that we want to accomplish. And you know, the important thing to remember is you know, God desires for Him to be involved, Him to be included in all of our decisions and plans. Would you stand with me this morning? We'll close in prayer.